Well, joining us live from New Jersey is Sahar Aziz. She's a distinguished professor of law at Rutgers University and former senior policy advisor at the US Department of Homeland Security. Glad to have you with us. Sahar, Garcia was wrongfully deported, and the Supreme Court of the US has ordered that he should be returned to the US because he has a legitimate danger of gang violence back home. Can the law force the US president to take him back?
Well, under such circumstances, usually the particular government wants to bring back someone in order to stand trial in a criminal context, and they will invoke an extradition treaty, which does exist between the U.S. and El Salvador since 1911. However, this is an immigration case, which is a civil case, and therefore extradition treaties rarely apply. It would take some creative legal argumentation to invoke the extradition treaty. The alternative is through diplomacy, especially when you have a strong relationship between the two countries. It would have been very easy if Trump had wanted, which he clearly does not want, to bring back Abrego from El Salvador by requesting that the president of El Salvador send him back on an airplane so that he can go through the immigration court system and exercise his due process rights to determine whether he can transfer or adjust his status to a green card holder, for example, because his wife is a U.S. citizen. He also has a child, a U.S. citizen child born in the U.S. who has a disability and autism. There are many reasons why he may get relief and have the removal order, which he is challenging, be overturned. However, he doesn't have that opportunity because he was effectively abducted by ICE or kidnapped and sent against the law to El Salvador, to the very country that an immigration court said he has a well-founded fear of persecution from gangs. That's independent of him challenging the allegation that he is a member of MS-13. He has repeatedly said he is not, and the government doesn't seem to have any evidence other than a confidential informant, which oftentimes confidential informants are quite unreliable and are not provided as an opportunity for the immigrant to challenge the testimony, which is also the case here.
I see. And is it in dispute at all whether Garcia entered the US illegally in terms of that immigration civil case, as you mentioned? I mean, is it for certain that he did enter the US illegally?
Well, when he was abducted by ICE, he was lawfully in the U.S. pending process or pending a decision on his challenge of removal. So there was a removal order, which is another word for a deportation order. However, he was challenging it because he was alleging that he had a well-founded fear of persecution. And in fact, a judge said, yes, you do have a well-founded fear, and therefore you are not deportable. However, then you go through the appeal process, and it takes time. And there are numerous cases where, for example, a humanitarian waiver is offered or other sorts of exceptions are granted when someone like him, for example, who's lived in the U.S. since 2011 and has never had a criminal record. He has a U.S. Citizen wife. He has a U.S. citizen child. He's completely law-abiding. That's exactly the type of profile that often, though not necessarily, gets relief, even if he is not here as an immigrant or with a valid visa.
OK, and obviously the danger here legally is that, you know, this could set a precedent, couldn't it? That, you know, this could happen to other people if they're wrongfully deported and then they can't come back to the US. But I was just wondering, in terms of El Salvador's president, you're saying in the White House on the current visit that it's a preposterous question, quote, to ask if he will return Garcia. You know, what's really going on there?
It's not a preposterous question at all. If the president of El Salvador wanted to return him, and if President Trump wanted him to come back so that he could continue through the legal process and that he could adhere to the Supreme Court's ruling that ordered the executive branch under Trump to facilitate the return of Abrego, then it would happen. This can easily be resolved diplomatically. What is likely happening is that Trump doesn't want to appear to be openly disobeying a Supreme Court order for him to facilitate the return of the unlawful deportation of Abrego. So he is having the president of El Salvador do the dirty work for him and state incorrectly that he cannot return him. He can return him, and the the executive branch has been ordered by the Supreme Court to bring him back so that he can go through the legal process. What this means for people in the U.S. who are not U.S. citizens is that we're seeing a trend that whether you are a green card holder like Mahmoud Khalil, and now there's another green card holder who's Palestinian American, who's Palestinian and was applying for American citizenship at Columbia, who's now also been arrested. And if you are a student, an international student who otherwise had a valid visa, that if the U.S. government unilaterally decides under Marco Rubio or under Trump in a complete arbitrary and capricious abuse of power, that they want to deport you, ICE is arresting you, detaining you, and essentially trying to get rid of you. So it appears that whatever legal rights you may have on paper, by having a valid visa, by having a green card, by applying for adjustment of status like Abrego and challenging a removal order, that seems to mean nothing to the Trump administration. And that usually is a textbook case of lawlessness, where the law does not matter. And so this is why so many attorneys and judges have become rightly concerned that we as a country are teetering towards an authoritarian society.
Okay. Sahar Aziz, Distinguished Professor of Law at Rutgers University, we really appreciate your time. Thank you.